Welcome to This Explainer. You know those streets you walk every single day? They're being silently reshaped, not just by local businesses opening and closing, but by these massive, invisible, shifting currents of global capital. So today, we're going to unpack the actual mechanics of gentrification and explore exactly how and why our neighborhoods transform.
I mean, you've probably seen it happen firsthand, right? That gritty, old warehouse on the corner suddenly transforms into a brightly lit artisanal roaster selling $7 lattes. It's a super common experience in cities all over the world. But the vocabulary we use to describe it often gets pretty tangled up. People toss around terms like urban renewal, revitalization, and gentrification like they're all the exact same thing. But for urban scholars, they actually mean very, very different things.
The absolute crucial dividing line between general urban renewal and gentrification is one word: displacement. Think about it like this. If a city comes in, fixes the roads, plants some trees, or adds a new park, and they do all this without pushing out the folks who already live there, scholars generally call that revitalization. But gentrification, strictly speaking, gentrification literally requires that element of displacement. It's when the original, usually lower-income residents, can simply no longer afford to stay in their own homes.
Here is our roadmap for today. 1. Defining a contested term. 2. How neighborhoods change. 3. Measuring the human cost. 4. The Global South perspective. And finally, 5. Solutions for equitable cities.
Section 1. Defining a contested term.
Now, few concepts in urban studies generate as much fierce, polarized debate as gentrification. Seriously, the literature is deeply divided here. Is gentrification inherently harmful, or is it naturally revitalizing? Researchers even struggle to pinpoint the exact line between someone voluntarily moving and someone being forced out. So we're going to stay entirely neutral today. We're just here to understand the underlying data, the mechanics, and the frameworks behind how these neighborhoods change without taking sides on the politics.
The term itself actually has roots going back to 1964. British sociologist Ruth Glass coined it while she was watching the transformation of working-class London boroughs, like Islington. At the time, this whole middle-class invasion of traditional working-class enclaves felt genuinely scandalous to the locals. She pointed out that once the gentry, the middle class, started moving in, all this reinvestment in aging housing stock led to rapid social upgrading. The landscape visibly changed, and eventually it led to the total displacement of the original working-class occupiers.
Section 2. How neighborhoods change. So why does all this capital suddenly flow into a previously neglected area? Well, a foundational concept to understand here is geographer Neil Smith's rent gap theory. Picture a neighborhood that has faced decades of, say, municipal neglect or purposeful redlining. All that neglect drastically pushes down property values. That means the capitalized land rent, basically the income a property generates right now, is extremely low. But the potential rent that developers could capture at its highest and best use, like, say, tearing it down to build luxury apartments, remains really high. When the gap between those two numbers gets wide enough, boom, it triggers a massive influx of developer cash. The profit margin simply becomes way too good to ignore.
Now, while every city has its own unique flavor, researchers consistently observe this fascinating four-step progression. Stage 1 is pioneer investment. This is where risk-tolerant folks, usually artists or students, move in. They're drawn purely by cheap rent and cool character architecture. They shift the cultural vibe, making the area trendy. But that creates immediate friction when Stage 2 hits, early-stage gentrifiers. We're talking young professionals and yuppies opening boutique cafes. By Stage 3, established gentrification locks in. Large corporate developers arrive. And in a cruel twist of irony, those very artists who made the neighborhood desirable in the first place, they're often the first to get evicted as rents completely spike. Finally, global cities hit Stage 4, super gentrification. This is where ultra-wealthy, global elites displace even the upper-middle-class residents who just arrived in the earlier stages.
However, you should know this four-step model isn't some strict law of physics. It's more of a handy heuristic. Economic cycles, aggressive policy interventions, or just really strong community resistance can completely alter the path. Some neighborhoods, for example, actually stall out in the early stages because local coalitions successfully block luxury rezonings. That effectively stops massive developers in their tracks and freezes that rent gap we just talked about.
Section 3. Measuring the human cost.
How do planners actually know this is happening in real time? Well, urban researchers track a specific bundle of indicators across 3 categories to identify upgrading neighborhoods. In the housing market, they're looking for rising median rents and sudden spikes in residential renovation permits. Demographically, they track rising household incomes and shifts in education levels. You'll actually often see household sizes shrink as large families get replaced by single young professionals. And that directly impacts our third indicator, the commercial landscape. That shifting demographic causes your local, family-owned grocery stores to be rapidly replaced by boutique fitness studios or high-end retail chains.
But because no single metric tells the whole story, city planners don't just guess anymore. They use GIS spatial composite indices as an early warning system. By bundling all these variables together, the income changes, the rent growth, the demographic shifts, planners create a single map layer that highlights gentrification risk zones. It gives city halls this incredible real-time heat map, showing exactly where displacement pressures are building up long before a crisis peaks.
When we look at the consequences, the academic literature points to some severe displacement. This can be direct displacement, think formal evictions or skyrocketing rents, but there's also exclusionary displacement. This is more like an invisible barrier. Low-income individuals who historically would have moved into the neighborhood simply cannot afford to anymore, which fundamentally alters the social fabric over time. On the flip side, measurable positive impacts absolutely do exist. We're talking increased municipal tax revenue, reduced crime, improved public services, and massive property value gains for long-term homeowners who actually manage to stay. The debate in the field centers heavily on who captures those benefits versus who bears the heavy burden of displacement.
Section 4. The Global South Perspective.
Applying these classic models to the Global South reveals a massive research gap. Honestly, almost all mainstream urban theory is deeply Western-centric, focusing pretty much exclusively on North America or Europe. That makes a rapidly growing city like Accra, Ghana, an absolutely vital frontier for modern urban studies. Dropping our focus into Accra completely twists the classic rules we just learned, and it presents an incredibly fascinating dynamic.
Instead of gentrification being sparked by local bank loans and private corporate developers capitalizing on historic redlining, Ghanaian urban change is driven by entirely different engines. A huge driver, diaspora remittances. That's migrants sending money home from abroad to finance luxury construction. Furthermore, land isn't just bought and sold on an open individual market. Much of it is governed by customary family or stool land tenure. This traditional, non-market control can act as a deep buffer, legally protecting long-standing families from being bought out. But conversely, when family chiefs do decide to lease to developers, it bypasses standard market frictions, accelerating massive redevelopment practically overnight.
In historically mixed-income areas of Accra, like Osu, we are seeing significant commercial upgrading, where local businesses are just getting squeezed by rising rents. Meanwhile, in established enclaves like East Legon or Cantonments, older bungalow-style housing is being actively replaced by high-density, high-value apartment developments. Interestingly, these are often aimed squarely at expatriates and returning migrants. And adding immense pressure to all this is the local rental market structure itself. Unlike Western norms where you might pay the first and last month's rent, the common Ghanaian practice demands 1 to 2 full years of rent in advance. I mean, you can imagine what an immense barrier to entry that creates for working-class residents.
Section 5. Solutions for Equitable Cities.
Planners do have a toolkit to try and capture the benefits of neighborhood improvement while mitigating the displacement of vulnerable people. In Western cities, we'll often see inclusionary zoning, which requires developers to build below-market rate units, and community land trusts. A community land trust is incredibly effective because a nonprofit literally buys the land itself, permanently removing the land cost from the housing cost to preserve long-term affordability. But in a place like Ghana, where formal tenant registries and comprehensive property taxes are still developing, the focus shifts. There, a key solution is strengthening customary land secretariat records to firmly protect long-resident families' claims. By combining robust customary records with the GIS-based monitoring we discussed earlier, cities can spot and manage gentrification pressure early on.
Ultimately, whether it's driven by local artists seeking cheap rent in London or global remittances building high-rises in Accra, the ongoing transformation of our urban spaces leaves us with one vital question to ponder. As the rent gaps close and the concrete is poured, look around the streets you walk every day and ask yourself, who is your neighborhood really being built for?